David DiRamio, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to talk with you.
David, today we're going to have a conversation about leadership in technology and your story as a leader, how you got to be a leader, how you grew as a leader, things you learned, some great achievements, some mistakes, and everything that comes with that type of growth story, right? But I want to get started with the basics for the benefit of the audience. What do you do today for a living?
So I am a senior software engineering architect and leader.
Very good. And how did you get there? Tell us a little bit about your story so far as a professional and how you grew towards your career.
Sure. Well, I have a lot of experience in a lot of different things that kind of and got me to where that I am today. Uh, Started out when I was an infant. Really, my dad spent the first 20 some years of his career working at IBM. So I grew up with computers in my house, and this was in the mid 80s. So not everybody had a computer at the time. But I would actually do my homework on the computer in elementary school and had kids actually make fun of me because they were like, "Why do you use a computer? Nobody uses a computer. That's silly." So fast forward today, who's laughing now?
Yeah.
Uh, so that kind of being in technology and around technology for my entire life. When I went to college, I started out as a computer science major and turned out I did not like it at all. So I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, but I wasn't sure. So there wasn't a lot of resources out there. So I launched a website, careeroracle.com, where professionals working in their career could mentor confused college students and help them figure out what they want to do. What is it like to be a lawyer? What is it like to be a doctor? Because you watch a movie or TV show and you see a lawyer in the courtroom and making this great speech, and you think, oh wow, that's awesome. I'm going to go to law school and take the bar exam because that's what I want to do every day, only to find out when you actually get there that it's only a small percentage of what's involved in that type of career. So the whole idea of it was to help students figure that out. Unfortunately, it was back in 2002. The internet was very new then. LinkedIn was just launching. Facebook didn't exist yet. So trying to get professionals to put their personal information out there, especially information about their career on this new internet, was just unheard of. And it was really difficult. There was a lot of hesitation. So it was something that I had kind of self funded. I didn't know how to build a website at the time. So I spent a lot of money of my savings hiring a company to build it for me. Eventually, I ran out of money and just wasn't feasible for me to keep it going. But I still had other ideas. I've always kind of had the entrepreneur bug, always wanted to kind of start my own business. So I knew that I couldn't keep paying other people uh, to build these sites for me and these ideas for me. So I actually bought some books and taught myself how to program in PHP. Uh, Started building some websites, took on a couple little projects here and there, and just kind of started building my portfolio. And early on, did a lot of website building and programming for free. But I kept telling myself, this is the way I've got to do this. My first, I actually landed my first programming job, my real programming job, uh, at a company called Automated Financial Systems, where this company built software for commercial lending, which was their software was run by the majority of the major banks in the U.S. But it was COBOL. It wasn't PHP, it was COBOL. But, programming at the end of the day, the concepts are the same. It's just learning the nuances of the language. But schools aren't teaching COBOL anymore. And so they were running into a problem where a lot of the people that they had maintaining and building their systems were retiring. So they created a COBOL Academy where they taught 10 of us how to program in COBOL. So I learned a lot there, but in fact, that was one of the lessons that I learned from one of the mentors there was we had a test because the software ran every night in a batch cycle, and we had a test cycle that we could use in our development environment. And early on, a lot of the people in that class were afraid to make any changes to the code because they were afraid of breaking that test batch cycle. And one of the mentors said, "Hey, you know what? If you're not breaking it, you're not working." So that's kind of something that has always stuck with me, where it's, obviously you don't want your code to break, you don't want things to break, but that's just part of being a developer and an engineer. You're going to have bugs, your stuff is going to break. It's what you learn from it. So that was a great lesson that I had. Uh, but my passion was really in the web applications. I wanted to do something a little bit more modern. So I ended up working for an intermediate unit here in Pennsylvania, which the intermediate unit is an organization that supports all of the K through 12 school districts in the county. So I was building internal applications for the intermediate unit to use. I built an application for the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So some different things that were there, and really grew my skills. I started really diving into the Laravel PHP framework, and really kind of taking that to the next level. While I was there, I went back to school and got my MBA because the business side of things has always been where I wanted to go. Upon graduation, an opportunity came up at Volley. Volley was actually created when a private equity firm acquired 3 companies and combined them into a single entity. My first project, the main reason I was hired there, was to take a mortgage loan application system, and it was a legacy system that they had. It was distributed. Each client ran on a separate server. It was written in an old version of PHP. It was not very scalable. It was costly to run and maintain. So my task was to evaluate that system, pull out all the features that we needed, architect and build a new system that was scalable, maintainable. So I built that using Laravel, built a multi-tenant SaaS-based application hosted in AWS that we took it from a client implementation that was about a month process down to a couple days. So I learned a lot during that about that particular application. Once that application was up and running, I was promoted to VP of engineering, where I then had the opportunity to really start leading teams and be a part of kind of the more strategic direction of the organization and where we wanted to take things.
So a lot of learning, a lot of launching businesses and everything that entrepreneurship means, and then leading teams. What would you say was the biggest challenge in your career? Was it learning new things like PHP, COBOL, the different things that you learn, in your career, building websites, then going back for your MBA? Was it building products, or was it leading teams? Out of all of those things that you mentioned, what's the biggest challenge that you had in your career?
I think the biggest challenge, I've had a few. One of them was just figuring out what I wanted to do.
Right.
And
Okay.
some days I'm still trying to figure that out. But I think a big challenge for me was turning the self-taught programming skills into a career. And I think today that's something that is a little bit easier to do with the prevalence of boot camps and all these kind of schools that have been set up to kind of teach people programming. Programming, it's not an easy thing, but it's something that has the barrier of entry can be on the lower side when you consider the resources that are available. Um, a lot of them, many you can even find for free, but a low cost. Somebody that doesn't have a college degree or a lot of formal education can go and do a boot camp and can get an entry level job making a decent living that way. Um, for me, that stuff wasn't as prevalent. So I didn't have like any type of certification or anything that I could say, okay, yeah, I completed this boot camp. So here's an example of my skills. So trying to showcase that, building up a portfolio, and being able to convince a company that, yeah, I can do this. And I think too, it's imposter syndrome too. I think I've certainly have had my share of imposter syndrome throughout my career. And, I think that's something that a lot of people, I think, especially today, will experience regardless of their career. Things move so quickly. And as a programmer, as an engineer, learning and keeping up with the latest technologies is a challenge, because it's stuff is released so quickly that by the time you learn it and get into it and start to actually master it, it's being replaced by something else. So those are some of the challenges that I have faced throughout my career.
Um, did anyone you mentioned someone when you were learning COBOL? What mentors do you remember that had a great impact in your career?
So I've had a few. I would say most importantly for my career, my parents have been huge. They've been some of the strongest supporters uh, in my life, putting me into positions for success, whether it was putting me through college, enabling me to pursue career work while I was in college, right when I graduated from college, and just providing guidance throughout my career. Um, especially being in a similar field as my father, uh, there's been overlap there where he's been able to provide me with a lot of insight and guidance. Um, Professionally, I've had, looking back, I've had two really incredible bosses. The first boss, his name was Jerry. I worked for him at Automated Financial Systems. Uh, he he really showed me the ropes. He really gave me the skills and the things that I needed to succeed as a programmer. And not just as a programmer, but just kind of how to handle and working with other programmers and people. The second significant mentor I've had would have been CJ, who was he was my boss at Volley, and he taught me so much as I really grew into the higher level leadership position, and what that entails, and navigating the challenges that come along with it, because it's when you get to that level, it's managing both directions. You have to manage down, but a lot of times, even more importantly, it's managing up. And those are some of the things that he really guided me on and helped shape me into the leader that I am today.
What does it mean to you to manage a team? What changes besides the managing up and down? Let's focus on managing down. What changes and how did you approach those first situations of leading a team?
First and foremost for me, it's I've been fortunate to have a couple really great bosses. I've also worked for some not so great bosses. Um, and I subscribe to treat others how you would like to be treated. So for me, in my in my approach to leadership, that is the approach that I take. Um, I people are the most important asset to any organization, no matter what the organization does. So it's as a leader, it's my job to make sure that my people feel heard. They are getting the tools that they need. They are being taken care of, and that they're being treated like people. Um, Nobody. I don't think anybody wants to work for someone who doesn't care. Nobody wants to work for a tyrant. So just adapting to each situation. And I think being a strong leader is being adaptable, being able to listen and understand what challenges somebody is facing. And not sometimes it's not just at work. Life is life is hard, and sometimes as people are going through their career, there's different life events that happen and can affect things and affect how they're performing. So being able to recognize that and understand that and work with them to ensure that they are getting everything that they need to be successful, because at the end of the day, the more I can take care of my people, the more they're going to take care of me.
100%. How do you set direction? How do you set objectives and how do you track results?
Well, as a leader, I end up working very closely with the product owner, with the with upper management, um, trying to really just trying to identify what we're going to do, allocating the necessary resources to accomplish something. When it comes to, I don't really like to assign out tasks to people. Um, I like to assign features and then leave the task to the engineers to figure out how that needs to be accomplished. I think it forces them to think about what they're doing on a little bit of a deeper level, which then in turn, I believe, will make them a more effective engineer. Um, for me, it's quality over quantity when it comes to tracking results. The most important thing is getting a feature deployed to production when we promised we would, without disruption to the application, and hopefully with no bugs. Um, for the engineers, it's the quality of the code that they're producing. Um, and our, we go through and we work in sprints. So during our sprint planning, it's going through the features, assigning the features, and are we, with the stories, are we making sure that the developers have enough work to keep them busy throughout the sprint, but not so much that they can't accomplish everything during the sprint. And if they can't, then I have to figure out why. And one of the things that can really derail a sprint is if there's a lot of bugs from a previous deployment. So it's kind of it's one of those things that kind of keeps rolling. If you don't spend the time the first time to put it out there, you get it deployed, you have your next sprint, you get everything planned, you block everything out in the sprint. Well, but then we've got 10 bugs that we have to address that are now in production. That's got to come from somewhere. So now we're pushing stuff out of the sprint. It's so I don't think there sometimes you can run into organizations where it's very metric driven. How many stories are you completing? Are you hours and all that? But I don't necessarily believe that's the ideal approach, because there's some things that you can't necessarily measure but are more important, and that is quality. If we can put out a feature that works from the beginning, that does not require us to go back and make a lot of changes and make a lot of fixes, then we did our job correctly.
So being able to work in a feature beginning to end, that is one of the things you value most in developers. What else do you value most in developers?
I think an important skill is to be able to work collaboratively with the team. Um, I don't like, I'm not a fan of developers with egos. Um, there's very there's very rarely only one way to program something. And you can take two people that will potentially do it different ways. And oftentimes a senior engineer is going to do something differently than, say, a junior level engineer. Doesn't necessarily mean that the way that the junior engineer did it was wrong. So as long as it works, as long as there's not a negative impact to, say, performance or maintainability, I will typically let that go through. Now, you know, I will coach a junior developer on, well, you know, I see what you did. Here's something else to consider, because I've learned a lot along the way. There's a lot of things you learn that you only gain by experience. So it's important to pass that down. But so a developer that's receptive, but doesn't have an ego, that's really important for me. The ability to think, as oftentimes as a developer, you get a requirement document that it's not often that requirement document is perfect or 100% complete. So it's important that a developer is able to understand the business side of what they're programming for, so that they're able to analyze and think through some of these features as they're building them out, so that if something doesn't seem right, or if they are going through and, hey, there's a scenario that might have come up, you know, does that developer feel empowered to go and talk to their team lead, or to the product person, or to whoever they need to talk to clarify what it is that they're trying to do? Because again, that comes back to the quality piece of it, because we don't want to, if they can come up with, if they think of a scenario that maybe the business side missed, we want to account for that if possible before we deploy it, because otherwise it's going to come up.
Very important. Let's go back to a little bit to your experience. You were an entrepreneur, you were a technology leader. Compare both, right? What skills go from one place to the other? Which skills are different? How would you compare being an entrepreneur with being a technology leader?
So, everybody has two sides of their brain, right? You got your left and your right side, and I'd be lying if I told you I knew which one was actually the creative and the logical one, but that's basically what it is. You got your logical side and you've got your creative side. Um, Developers and engineers by nature tend to be more logically based in their thinking and approach. Programming is all logic. So if you're not good with logic, don't go into programming. Um, on the other hand, an entrepreneur needs to tap into more of the creative side. For me, there's been a little bit more overlap, because the ideas that I've kind of come up with as an entrepreneur have been somewhat related to technology, or have required technology to kind of pursue them. So I've had a little bit more overlap between the two. But as an entrepreneur, you have to be scrappy and agile, right? You got to be able to, especially if you're starting a business, it's, you don't have a big organization, so you need to be able to wear a bunch of hats. So you are still doing the logical stuff. If it's a technology company, you might be doing programming, you might be doing the financials, you're doing the marketing. So you have to wear a lot of hats as an entrepreneur. When you If you're in a small organization, you can have a little bit more of that environment. So you may not necessarily be the marketing person, but you might still be able to have an impact in that role. Whereas as you get into larger organizations, or even starting in a small organization that grows into a larger organization, you start to implement processes and procedures and things to create consistency across the organization. And some of that can stifle some of that agility that you get in a kind of in an entrepreneurship or a new business venture. So it really comes down to the the approach and the way of thinking, and what side of the brain that you're really using.
And do you think there's a little bit of that? Do you, Let me phrase it this way. Do you think developers could benefit from that creative side of entrepreneurship into how they are creating solutions? Is there a kind of a potential benefit there?
Oh, absolutely. I And that's one of the things that I encourage on my team is, and I think some of that can come from the understanding of the business. As an engineer, you don't necessarily, if you have a well-defined requirement document, it doesn't matter what industry you're writing that code for. You can plug in and do it for anything, and you don't need to know because it's everything's right there. In my experience, no matter how big the organization is, the I've I don't think I've yet to have a complete requirement document for a feature that I've had to build. So it's having an understanding of the business of what you're doing. So the application uh, that I built that for was for the mortgage industry. Um, I've never been a loan officer, so I've never worked in the mortgage industry before I got there, but I've owned a few houses. I've gone through the mortgage process myself. I've learned it. I actually had a real estate license at one point. So, I had some exposure to it there. But just really learning as much as I could about the business, about the industry as I was building this application helps because as I would build a feature, that I would be looking to the future as well. Kind of, well, okay, well, we're building this feature, but how could a client use this? Are there other ways potentially that the client could use it than what is being defined here? Because one of the things that I find really fun about where I am is I'm working with the business teams, but I have the technology background to understand what we can do with technology. And as we're sitting there and talking through things and I'm listening to some of the problems they're having, I'm solutioning and coming up with ideas in my head of, okay, how can we do this? How can we, what I know about technology, how can we make this better? So yeah, for a programmer, an engineer to have that ability, that way of thinking can be huge because it's just another added layer that you have to your skill set, to the team, and just being able uh, to prepare for the future. Because if I'm building a feature, if there's something I can see, okay, well, here's how they want to use it today, but here's how I think it could be used in the future. That's out of scope for what we're doing right now. So I'm not actually going to build it, but I'm going to keep that in my mind as I'm architecting how I'm going to build it to put us in a position that, down the line when somebody says, "Oh yeah, we want to do this," it's very easy to go in and change it because I've already thought of that type of thing. So being able to think ahead is a huge skill.
Perfect. And so going back to technology, what technologies get you excited today and why?
Well, I mean, the big one right now, I think, is AI. There's certainly a lot of buzz around it. As an entrepreneur, still trying to figure out how to capitalize off of it. But as an engineer, I'm blown away by some of the stuff that it can do, and the speed at which it can do it. At the same time, it scares me a little bit. Um, for one, I've seen way too many movies where this didn't this didn't turn out well for humans. But I think it's something we need to be cautious about. The internet already has made it hard enough to discern what is fact and real versus fake content. And I think AI is going to make that 10 times more challenging. Um, I think it can lead to potentially some laziness when it comes to content creation and lower quality output from humans, and you know less and less thinking and analysis that we have to do, and just kind of, you plug in a prompt and now here's your stuff. It's not really, there's not that personal, that human touch. um I heard recently that, you know because of this, it's so difficult to discern, like, all right, is this a legitimate source, is this a legitimate website, versus not. That we'll probably start to see a shift where, we used to look at publications as a particular source, where now it's going to be individual brands and individual people that are going to become the sources. So there's going to be a shift. So it's certainly interesting. It's very powerful. And right now we're just scratching the surface of it. But I do think that there is some legitimacy in the concern that people have, as far as, what's going to happen with it.
I agree. I agree. It's we could talk for ages about that one. Um, where do you want to go from here in your career? What's next for David?
Well, that's what I'm still trying to figure out. I unfortunately, like many people today, I was you know, laid off from Bali when they were acquired by another company. So I'm currently looking for my next opportunity here. Um, I think in a dream world, I would be a game show host, but that's probably not going to happen. So, I've been kind of looking at something similar, like VP of engineering, with, eventually would like to move into a CTO type role.
Very good. Very good. For anyone in the audience, if you wanna contact David DiRamio, easy to find on LinkedIn. Nowadays, you can contact him directly. David, one last question to you. What do you do when you are not working?
Well, I have three of my own very young children, and a stepson as well. So Uh, pretty much most of my time is spent at some sports practice or game, or traveling to and from it. But uh, I like to keep up on the news and the latest trends when possible. But when I'm not working, I'd like to spend as much time with my family as possible. It's kids grow up really fast, and we only have a small amount of time to enjoy them when they're small and somewhat want to actually spend time with us. So I'm just right now I'm just kind of taking that in, and and enjoying that. Going to the beach is fun as well. I try to do that when I can, but yeah, spending time with family is where I really like to what makes me happy right now.
The most important time there is. So I like that very much. David, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much again for being a guest here at the show. I hope we can do this sometime again in the future. And it was a pleasure having you here.
No, I would love it. I appreciate it, and I had a lot of fun. So I enjoyed it.